Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Coggin. We will get started with this webinar in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining today, and we'll be with you shortly. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Rural Day 2018 training webinar. My name is John Coggin, the Director of Advocacy at the North Carolina Rural Center, and we're all so glad to have you on today. Before we get started, I would like to take care of just a few housekeeping items. If you do have any technical questions, have any trouble with the webinar software itself during the time, please call our Rural Center main line at 919-250-4314. We have staff on hand ready to help you sort out any technical concerns. Also want to let everyone know that we have all of your lines muted, but just to make sure, if you would also make sure that your line is muted from your end, that makes sure that we don't have any audio issues. Even though you are on mute, we encourage you to ask questions. You'll see on your dashboard that there is a questions bar. Please feel free to use that at any time during the webinar today, and there'll be actually several points at which we're going to be taking questions to make this interactive, so ask them as you have them. I also want to let you know that if you look down at the handout section, there are 4 or 5 handouts. Today we have our PowerPoint, so you can look at the PDF version of this PowerPoint even after the webinar is done. Our Rural Day agenda that is up to date as of today. And then we also have our rural count strategy, so you can see all 10 of our advocacy strategies, as well as our 2018 policy priorities that we'll be talking about later. So before we get started, I'd like to turn things over to Patrick to give us some words of welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let me just welcome you and thank you for being part of this webinar. We look forward to seeing all of you and many more next week at Rural Day. We're really excited about the 2nd annual Rural Advocacy Day, and we're really pleased with the way in which rural North Carolina has responded to this opportunity, and also the way in which leadership has responded to this opportunity. So it's a great agenda. It's going to be a great day for interaction between rural North Carolina and our elected leadership, and you also will get to meet many other very interested and interesting and well-connected guests as you participate in Rural Day activities. John's going to give you a really thorough overview of to prepare you for getting the most out of next week. I will say that everything about this day has really been informed by the road trip that John and I took over the last year. and the conversations we had with over 1,600 of you in all 80 of our rural counties across the state has really helped us shape the agenda and our priorities for 2018. We're excited about the prospects of where rural North Carolina sits as we get ready for Rural Day on May 29th, and we appreciate your participation.
All right, thanks, Patrick, and you'll be hearing from Patrick some more during the course of the webinar. We do have a lot to cover today, so we're going to focus on sort of four main themes. First, I'm going to give an overview of the purpose and goals of Rural Day. Then we're going to get down into the weeds on the schedule and logistics for the day. Then we're going to have a period where we'll give some tips for engaging with elected officials. If this is your first time scheduling meetings with your elected leadership, have no fear. We'll get into that in depth. And then finally, while we will be getting a lot of content on Rural Day about our three major policy priorities, we wanted to take a few minutes before Rural Day to give you an overview of those so you feel oriented for those conversations. And again, throughout, we're going to be taking your questions. So let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be our second annual statewide advocacy day for rural North Carolina. We had our first event last year. It was our first ever advocacy day focused explicitly on rural economic development. And this year we're building upon those successes. Currently, and the numbers ticking up just a little bit as we speak, but we right now have 442 attendees representing 82 counties for North Carolina. And on the day, you're going to be hearing from no less than 40 different speakers on a variety of issues. So it's going to be a cram-packed day. It's going to be a fun day, and we're going to have lots and lots of people there like you who are passionate about rural North Carolina. So the question, if you're new to the Rural Center, that might be on your mind is exactly what do we count as rural? The Rural Center uses a county-level population definition of rural. And so any county that has fewer than 250 people per square mile, we count as rural. Those are the 80 rural counties you see on your screen right now, are the 80 green counties. The 14 blue counties are a new designation for us. Those are regional city or suburban counties with the changing demographics of North Carolina. We now have 14 counties that aren't quite rural, but also aren't quite urban. And then we finally have those remaining 6 are our core urban counties. So if you were paying attention to those past two maps, you'll recognize that we actually have a lot of attendees at Rural Day from some of our urban and suburban counties. We think this serves that there's evidence that there's interconnectedness between our communities, and we share some of the same issues. At Rural Day, we're not going to be talking about the rural-urban divide. We're going to be talking about the many, many ways in which we can all work together to thrive as a state. So as Patrick said, we are going to be talking about issues that rose to the top during our rural road trip. So I want to turn things back over to Patrick just to give you a little synopsis of the road trip and what we heard.
So we spent the last year really from the 1st of April of 2017 until the 1st of April of 2018 visiting and spending time with the grassroots leaderships of our rural counties across the state. This map shows the legs of that journey. John and I did all of those trips together to all 80 counties. We had over 1,600 participants that we engaged in county level meetings. And we really had the conversations around two broad questions. One, what is working? What are you feeling good about? What is making a difference in your communities? And the second big question, what keeps you awake at night? What are those issues you're struggling with? What are the things that you just cannot do alone as local leaders? Through it all, we traveled over 8,400 miles on this journey, about 49 total days dedicated to the legs of this journey over that 1 year.
And the three priorities that rose to the top during the rural road trip were accessible high-speed internet, stabilizing and transforming rural health, and investing in stronger entrepreneurship and small business development systems. So a key piece of what we're going to be doing next week at Rural Day is giving you lots of information about these three topics, along with some potential solutions that you can then communicate to your leaders. A good piece of this day, while not formally part of the programming, are the meetings with legislators that we hope that you will schedule on your own. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but we do hope that if you're coming into town on the 29th, that you'll stick around on the 30th to share what you've learned and what you've heard with your legislators. So now let's talk a little bit about the details of Rural Day. So if you're coming into Raleigh, we know it's in the heart of downtown Raleigh. Things can get confusing, things can get chaotic. We want to make sure you're firmly situated as you arrive for the day. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking in depth about the schedule. Again, you can find that draft agenda on the handout section, and just make sure that you're situated and prepared for a very full day. So again, it's going to be on Tuesday, May 29th. We're starting a little bit later in the day to give you a little bit of time after the Memorial Day weekend. Everything this year is going to be housed at the Museum of History. Last year, if you came to Rural Day, you know that we had events going on in lots of different places. This time it's going to be much more contained. So once you get to the Museum of History, you are there for the rest of the day. Registration will open at 9 o'clock with a continental breakfast. So we encourage you to come and network and talk with people then. The convocation itself, our main programming, starts at 10 o'clock in the morning and will run until 5:30 when the Art of Rural Reception starts. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a minute. Again, on May 30th, we hope you stick around for some legislative visits. To give you a little bit more information about what's happening in the convocation, we're going to kick things off at 10 o'clock a.m. with welcomes from both Patrick and Governor Cooper. Then we're going to spend about an hour and a half on each of our three priority areas: broadband, health, and small business. At the end of the day, we want to let you know that the Rural Center is going to be making a special announcement, so we hope that you will stay in your seat until the very end. Throughout the day, we're going to be welcoming several special guests who are very top leaders in North Carolina. Governor Cooper will be speaking at the start of the day, right around 10:15 a.m. Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest is going to speak at the conclusion of our broadband section, right before we break for lunch at noon. And then the leaders of both houses of the General Assembly, Speaker Tim Moore and President Pro Tem of the Senate, Phil Berger, are going to be speaking back-to-back at 4:45 and 5 o'clock at the very end of the day. So not only for the special announcement, but we also hope that you stick around to hear from all of these special guests. Now, the rest of the day is going to be divided into these three broad areas. And for each of those topics, we have invited a keynote speaker who is at the top of their field in each of these areas. For broadband, we're going to be welcoming Curtis Wynn, the president and CEO of Roanoke Electric Cooperatives, and he'll be discussing how broadband infrastructure, the imperative for that, mirrors rural electrification in the previous century. Mr. Wynn will soon become the president of the National Rural Electric Cooperatives Association, so we are proud of having him as a North Carolina voice in the leadership of that national group. At the start of our health section, right after lunch, Dr. Laura Gerald, who's the president of Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust, will be giving her both her personal perspective as a native of Robeson County and her professional perspective as a leader of health philanthropy in the state. And then finally, Christopher Chung, who's the CEO of the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, will be joining us via video message to frame up the need for focusing on small business development. So now let's take a look beyond, in depth, of the programs beyond those keynotes. In the broadband section, we will feature three provider snapshots: Eric Kramer from Wilkes Communications and River Street Networks, Susan Myers from Eastern Carolina Broadband in Pink Hill, and Ron Walters from Pangea Internet in Polk County will all represent different business models that are providing internet services in rural North Carolina. They're going to share their stories with us and help inspire us about a variety of options for getting to the last mile. Then we're going to assemble a really great panel of policymakers and experts to talk about solutions for broadband across North Carolina. Tom Campbell, who's the host of the television show NC Spin, will be moderating this panel focused on policy solutions. We're going to welcome Senator Harry Brown, Deputy Superintendent of the Department of Public Instruction, Dr. Maria Petrie-Martin, Representative Robert Reeves, and Jeff Searle, who's the head of the North Carolina Broadband Infrastructure Office. Now, during these panels, both at this and health, we're not going to have time to take live questions from the floor, but we still want to engage you. So between now and even up until the period of the panel, we are going to be taking online questions through this SurveyMonkey survey. So we encourage you to go to this link and fill out the questions now that you know you want to ask of these speakers, or during the panel itself. Feel free to get online and fill out that survey. We'll be taking some questions during the panel, but even for the questions we aren't able to answer on Rural Day itself, we're going to be sending your unanswered questions to the panelists to get their written feedback that we're going to send back to you in our next Rural Counts newsletter. In our health section, after Dr. Gerald gives us our keynote, we're going to do another series of health snapshots, 5-minute TED Talk style stories capturing each of our 4 major sub-focus areas within healthcare. Dana Weston with UNC Rockingham Healthcare is going to talk about the importance of sustainable healthcare systems in our rural areas and talk about bringing the Hospital of Eden back from the brink. Then Carla Obial, who's the Executive Director of Care for Carolina Coalition, is going to talk about the importance of closing the health insurance coverage gap in North Carolina. After her, Steve North, who is with Mission Health and with the Center for Rural Health Innovation in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, is going to talk about his work in telehealth in rural areas. And then Sharon Brigner with Pharma is going to talk about the opioid crisis and how it affects our rural communities. After those snapshots, we're going to assemble another power panel of rock stars in their field to talk about what some of those statewide solutions are going to be for each of those areas. Anita Brown-Graham with the UNC School of Government is going to be moderating this panel that features Secretary of Department of Health and Human Services, Mandy Cohen, Rules Chair of the North Carolina House of Representatives, David Lewis, Josh Stein, our North Carolina Attorney General, and the President of Brunswick Medical Center, Shelbourne Stevens. Just like the broadband panel, we will be taking questions via audience members from this online survey, so we ask you to fill those out now or as you come up with the questions during the panel. For our small business section, we're going to do things a little differently. We're going to have lots of snapshots focusing on different aspects of the importance for small business. So after Chris Chung speaks via video message, Dr. Richard Bonanno, who's the head of NC State Extension, is going to talk about the different types of industries that are primed for development in our rural areas. Then we're going to give you some really exciting examples of how these industries are thriving in our rural areas. Lee Rankin from Banner Elk and Apple Hill Farm is going to talk about agritourism. Joan Maxwell, who's been in the boat manufacturing business for almost 30 years, is going to talk about her work with Regulator Marine in Edenton. And Tim Muth, who's head of the Jackson County Green Energy Park, is going to talk about how he and his group have flipped old landfill in Jackson County and are now providing sustainable energy for a whole collaborative of artists and artisans. So you're not going to want to miss these snapshots, which are going to be followed by another series of quick hit conversations around what we call the threads of business support. There are many different aspects that we know need to be put in place in order to cultivate and grow our small businesses in rural areas. So Jamie McMahon is going to talk about in Burnsville how their connectivity to internet and high-speed broadband is changing the landscape of small business development in Yancey County. Then Thomas Hall with UNC Pembroke is going to talk about how their incubator and entrepreneurship center are training the community, small business owners, and students for the future of entrepreneurship. Then you're not going to want to miss Napoleon Wallace, who's the Deputy Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Commerce. He's going to give an update on our Opportunity Zones program. This is a program from the new federal tax reform bill that allows the state to identify certain low to moderate income census tracts across the state that will be eligible to receive tax credits for investments in those areas. The U.S. Treasury just certified North Carolina's proposal for opportunity zones in each of our 100 counties, and now it's going to be time to get to work to make sure we're supporting that on the state level to make sure this tax incentive program works in our rural areas. So Napoleon's going to give us an overview of what's happened so far, and what's next. Finally, Richard Kronk with Rice Wrap Foods is going to talk about what's often at the top of people's minds when it comes to small business development, and that's access to capital. We're going to conclude our small business section with what we've all been waiting for, the special announcement from the Rural Center, and that's going to be made both by Sarah Thompson, a Rural Center board member, and the head of the Southwestern Commission, as well as our President, Patrick Woody. I'm not going to turn the mic over to Patrick right now for fear of him spoiling the surprise, but trust me when I say that you're going to want to be in the room for this, and then for the final speeches by Speaker Moore and Senator Berger. Phew, that's a lot of speakers, 40 to be exact. It's going to be a packed day full of great information, engaging speakers, intriguing conversations, and even though we're giving you that post-holiday late start of 10 o'clock a.m., by 5:30, I'm sure you're going to be ready to unwind. We hope you will join us after the convocation for our Art of Rural reception. If you remember last year at Rural Day, we hosted Real Rural, R-E-E-L, which featured documentary filmmakers who had made films exploring life in rural North Carolina. That event was a huge success, and this year we want to continue our theme of art by directly looking at art as economic development. The Art of Rural reception is bringing over a dozen artists from across the state, from Dillsboro to Little Washington, to show how art and artisans are transforming the economies of our towns and counties. You'll see how the Whirligig Park in Wilson is creating a national treasure in whimsical outdoor art, and how Madison County is honoring its industrial heritage and inspiring its next generation by employing artists to create pieces paying homage to its manufacturing history. Everywhere you look in the lobby of the museum, you're going to see exciting pieces of art, and throughout the reception, you can feast on local food and beverages. The event runs from 5:30 to 7, and we hope you will enjoy learning from the exhibitors, catching up with friends, and celebrating a wonderful day. I'm going to conclude this section before turning it over to a few set of questions with making sure everyone understands the logistics for the day. This map of the vicinity of the legislature is on our website, but I'm going to help you out. I think it's best to turn this thing 90 degrees so you have north facing up. So like I said before, the North Carolina History Museum is now circled in red, and that's where everything's going to be on the 29th. You'll see on this map that there are 3 highlighted yellow visitor lots. These are where we recommend that you park, particularly the one directly to the east of the Museum of History. But since General Assembly is going to be in session, those parking lots are going to fill quickly. So we encourage you to get there early, closer to the 9 o'clock hour than the 10 o'clock hour, or if you're going to have to get with us a little bit later in the day, be prepared to spend some time looking for a spot. But we encourage you to visit these visitors lots because everywhere around on street parking, you're going to have to park, you're going to have to pay every 1 or 2 hours, and you don't want to keep running back and forth to pay a meter. And any other lots in the downtown vicinity are a pretty good walk from the History Museum. Also, if you have not yet made a hotel reservation, you can find a list of hotels in the vicinity of the General Assembly on our Rural Day webpage. And even though we are going to be taking care of your breakfast, your lunch, and your evening reception food, if you would like to find a place to eat a full dinner after the reception, or if you're looking for a place to eat on Wednesday around your legislative visits, you'll also find a list of downtown restaurants on our Rural Day webpage. So with that, I'm going to check and see if we have any questions. And I'm not seeing any questions now, so I guess that just means that I've just covered all the bases. But I'm going to give just a second to drink a bit of water and see if anybody sends something real quick. All right. Well, again, the questions box is open throughout, so we'll keep on going and take your questions as they come in. So the next piece of this webinar is talking about engaging with elected officials. We are packing your day full on May 29th, and so we are hoping that you'll schedule your meetings with your legislators on Wednesday, May 30th. Some of you listening in this webinar are old hat at scheduling these meetings, but if you're coming to Raleigh for the first time, a little bit nervous, this is going to be our section to talk through how to approach those meetings and how to schedule them. Let's start with the basics. The General Assembly just launched this new website this week, so I had to go in and change all of my graphics, but you'll see a nice new website if you're wondering to figure out how to contact your legislators. First, you go here to this drop-down menu. It says Find a Bill, but you're going to go click on the View Member Info, and then you can go and find your member of the General Assembly through a scroll-down menu or through typing their name in that bar. What if you don't know who your representative is? No judgment here. Just go and look on the Who Represents Me tab. That'll take you to a page where it shows you a map of the entire state. There's one just like it underneath here for the North Carolina Senate. All you have to do, type in your home address in this box, and it'll pop up with your correct representative. So when you do get to your representatives page, y'all, I'm from Sanford, so I default to my home representative when doing things like this. So Representative Robert T. Reeves is my representative in Sanford. I can go to his page to find his contact information. Scheduling these meetings is very simple. All you need to do is call their office or shoot them an email, let them know you're going to be in town, and see when you can meet. If they do have a legislative assistant listed, this is who you're going to talk to, and it might be easiest to contact them directly. They're going to be the staff person that can set up those meetings for you. If not, we encourage you to call their Raleigh office, particularly since they're in session. As you see here, Representative Reeves lists contact information for his office in Sanford. These are not his legislative staff members. They might be a good way of contacting him when the session's not in, but now we would encourage you to call their Raleigh office. That'll make things a lot more expedited. So once you schedule those meetings, we encourage you to let us know. This helps us have a sense of who's going to be visited, what's going to be talked about, and then we can keep on building upon those relationships that you start after you're done. So here's another survey link. We encourage you to go, once you've scheduled those meetings, fill out this survey, let us know who you're going to be meeting with. It'll help us out a lot. So now you got your meeting scheduled. What are you going to do now? If you remember anything from this section of the webinar, I hope it'll be this: to enjoy yourself. It may sound counterintuitive, especially if you've never done this before, but at the risk of sounding like a bit of a schmuck, we are really lucky to have the chance to meet with our leaders. It's one of the top privileges of being an American. We have representatives whose job it is to listen to our concerns and work with us to solve our big problems. So enjoy yourselves during your meetings and take a second in the midst of the hustle and bustle to recognize the blessings that we have for even being able to do this. Okay, but really, what do we do? As you prep for your meeting, try to remember that your representatives are your neighbor. They live in your area, maybe even in your neighborhood. They see the same things you do on a daily basis. They know what many of our challenges are, and like you, they're looking for solutions. At the same time, though, we ask a lot of our legislators, especially at the state level. We give them part-time jobs, and even as they're spending more and more time in session, they don't get paid a lot for this. On top of asking them to devote much of their lives to governance, we also ask them to be experts on lots of different topics. No human being can have a deep level of knowledge on all the issues they're expected to rule on as a legislature. So that means they need us to work with them. You are there to give your insight, your expertise, and help them make important decisions. You are a collaborator. So as you enter the conversation, recognize that you're there to help them do their jobs. I hope that will relax you, but at the same time, remember to make sure you're polite and respectful. You're not there to antagonize, but to collaborate with a recognition that it takes a lot of personal sacrifice to do what they do. Also remember and have confidence in your own experience. You know, a lot of people feel like they might not have a deep level of expertise on broadband or healthcare or small business development, but you do have expertise from your own personal experience. You don't have to know exactly what policy should be enacted, but you can communicate what matters to you in real and compelling ways. Also, even though you're going as a part of Rural Day, don't feel like you have to be obliged to speak on behalf of the Rural Center. If a legislator asks you what our position is on one issue or another, you can simply direct them to us. At the same time, we do hope you'll use us as a resource. When you arrive for Rural Day, you're going to be given a program book that's going to be chock full of great data and talking points on each of these policy areas. So we hope you'll feel free to use this information in your conversations. Another important piece of preparing is to talk in stories. I'm going to say that again, talk in stories. And again, please tell stories. A lot of people feel like when they go in to talk to a legislator about policy issues, they need to be chock full of data and statistics and policy numbers. It's great to talk about specific bills. It's great to talk about statistics, but none of them are necessary. What is necessary is telling your story. I'm a policy wonk, y'all. I will fill in the gaps after you leave and once the legislator calls asking for more information. Your job is to tell your experience and help them care about the issue through your perspective. So those are the basics. Now let's think about how to plan ahead to make the most of your meeting. First, we recognize that these are going to be very short meetings. You might want to talk about different things, but today it's going to be wise to pick one issue you really want to cover, make sure you talk about that, and then cover others as time allows. So pick one of the priority areas that we're going to be talking about and think, why do you care about it? What is your story out from your experience, from your profession that leads you to care about this? And think about, while you're sitting in Rural Day, what are stories from the stage that really speak to you, that you want to share and make sure your legislator hears? Again, we encourage you to do your research. Go back to that page. Again, we're going to pick on my representative, Robert Reeves, and look at some of the other areas of their profile beyond their biography. So look and see what committees they're on. If they are on a healthcare committee and you want to talk to them about healthcare, that's where they're really going to have a unique role in introducing, debating, and shaping legislation on your topic. Also look and see what bills they've introduced. This gives you a really great insight about the things they care about and see if you can match up things they care about with what you want to talk about. Also, we encourage you to plan some questions that you want to ask. You want to share your story, but you also want to spark some conversation. So you could ask them what they're working on in the legislature, what they're struggling with when they're thinking about an issue, or, and this is probably something they don't get very much, what you can do for them to help advance the cause. So legislators will vary on how easy or difficult it is to engage with them in conversations, but it always helps to have some planned conversation questions to spark it. And we encourage you, don't be afraid to keep things on topic. Legislators have their minds on a million things during session, and they might be coming from a meeting that they're still meditating on. If they ask questions on a completely different topic than you want to talk about, you can engage them if you want to talk about that too. But don't be afraid to respectfully tell them that you're here today to talk about this particular issue and you'd really like to talk with them about that. That way you can shift back to that topic before going down a rabbit hole on a completely unrelated issue. Finally, we'd like for you to end with some action items. Don't just let the conversation trail off. A good way of doing this is to ask what you can do to follow up with more data, information, or more contacts in your area. If they are asking for information that you don't know, feel free to refer them to us for more information. We also encourage you to think of events or happenings in your area that you can invite them to. They're going to be ready to get home after the short session. What are some things that you can invite them? A tour of your facility, a big public event, some people that you could introduce them to and schedule a meeting with to keep that conversation going. Regardless what the action item is, think of this meeting as the beginning of a conversation rather than the end. Next, we want to make sure that we hit hard some of these new security protocols that are happening in the General Assembly. You may have heard that the legislature just enacted some new security measures that, while they're going to keep us a lot safer when we're there, are also going to create probably a hassle as they try to figure out how to streamline these processes. All visitors to both buildings of the General Assembly are going to have to go through metal detectors and security. You're also going to have a valid photo ID to get into the building, so please make sure to bring that with you. We Also encourage you, because of all the security, because there's probably going to be long lines, arrive early, be ready to wait in line to get through the security, and also don't bring more personal items than is necessary. We encourage you to leave behind your laptops, your bags, your purses, you know, especially knives, but we would hope you would do that anyway. So make sure, though, that you are prepared for this and work it into your schedule. Once you get to the legislature, things can be a little confusing. So going back to this map earlier, again, the Museum of History is where we're going to be for Rural Day. All of the offices that you'll be visiting are either going to be in the Legislative Building, or LB, or the Legislative Office Building, or LOB. How can you tell where to go? Well, there's a couple of ways of doing that. When you're looking at your legislator's profile, anything in the LB, Legislative Building, is going to be listed as being on Jones Street. Anything on Salisbury Street is in the Legislative Office Building. Another trick is to look at how many numbers there are in the room number. Any 4-digit room numbers are going to be in the Legislative Building. Any 3-digit room numbers are going to be in the Legislative Office Building. When you walk into the Legislative Building, you can also know which way to go. If you're walking in from that Jones Street side in the front of the building, all the House offices are going to be on the left side of the building, along with the House chamber where they meet, and the Senate chambers and all the Senate office buildings are going to be on the right. The shape of the Legislative Building can get a little bit confusing, so if you ever get lost in all the different 4 courtyards, feel free to go back into the front lobby and ask for some support. There are also maps and listings of all the offices in the front lobby. There's a map of the courtyard, so you can see that the Legislative Building is divided into 4 quadrants in these 4 courtyards, and the numbers coordinate based on which courtyard they're in. So, once you prepare for your meeting, be sure to arrive, again, 30 minutes early. Make sure you're going to the right building so you don't have to go through security twice if you go to the wrong building. Make sure to dress professionally, bring that photo ID. When you enter the office building, when you enter the office of your legislator, you're going to be greeted by the legislative assistant. The golden rule tells us to be nice to everybody, but these folks are particularly important to be nice to. They work long hours to make sure things move smoothly in those offices, and often they don't get a whole lot of thanks. So make sure to greet them with a smile and a kind word. When you're talking with your representatives, even if you know them personally, when you're in the building, it's always good to default to a formal form of address, be that Senator or Representative or Mr. or Mrs. Another important point is sort of counterintuitive for many of us that want to show our appreciation for their time. We might want to bring them some food or a token of appreciation from our hometown for their service. We encourage you not to bring gifts. That's because there are specific rules on levels and types of gifts that are allowed and not, and you don't want to cross those rules. Other legislators have made a commitment not to receive any gifts. So to prevent any sort of awkwardness, make sure to leave those gifts at home. But we do encourage you, again, to come armed with some invites to keep those conversations going. Now, you might show up and the schedule changes on you. We hope that you will be prepared to go with the flow and react considerately to chaotic schedules in those buildings. So if a legislator is late or has to cancel or has to move a meeting, we hope you'll build some time in your schedule for some flexibility, but also recognize they're not doing that as a personal affront to you, but meetings and votes can be called with a moment's notice and things might have to change. Also be prepared for a shortened meeting. So again, come with that story that you're ready to tell very quickly, get your point across quickly, and then if they do have to go, you've gotten your main message in. That means that you need to stay focused, stick to the topic. Again, it's okay to answer unrelated questions, but don't feel like you have to go down any sort of rabbit holes. And finally, offer to follow up on what you don't know. Once you're finished with your meeting, we do hope you'll let us know how it goes. After Rural Day, we're going to be sending everyone surveys both on the day itself and on their legislative meetings. So just like you let us know beforehand, let us know after it gets out. What did you talk about? What went well? What didn't go well? What could we do better in preparing you next year? What do we need to follow up with? This will help us a lot and help us prepare for future events. Now, there's some of you who might not be able to stick around on the 30th. Some of you might not even be coming to Rural Day. I don't know, maybe you just want to listen to me talk for an hour and a half. If you can't be there on the 30th in person, that doesn't mean your voice can't be heard. Phone it in. Call your legislator's office. Let them know that you're a constituent and where you live. Let them know that you are calling as part of the Rural Day activities, and let them know what issue you care about. You'll most likely talk to a legislative assistant who will take a message and pass that on to a legislator. But these phone calls matter just as much as those in-person meetings. So don't be afraid to make a phone call. So finally, before I pause again for any questions, make sure to plan ahead, get those meetings scheduled now because it's going to be very hard to get a meeting on the fly. Prepare what you want to talk about with some conversation points and action items. Remember to be yourself, that you don't have to shapeshift into a policy wonk in order to have these conversations. Your story matters. And then finally, once again, I'll end where I started and just say, have a good time. Enjoy yourself and enjoy speaking up for your community. With that, I'm going to pause for some questions, and it looks like we might have gotten some. One question right now is which session is most, and this is going back to our schedule, is most likely to discuss protections for migrant workers. While that is not one of the topics that is going to get some pre-programmed airtime, it's certainly something that affects all of these issues when it comes to healthcare access, when it comes to small business development. And we hope that in your conversations through the program, through your conversations to panelists before or during the program, that you'll bring this up and have conversations with other people. All right, so in the time that we have remaining, we are going to talk a little bit again about an overview about the three major issue areas that we're going to be covering at Rural Day. As you may remember, the Rural Center launched our Rural Counts program about 2 years ago. And our Rural Counts strategies are a 10-point platform that cover a whole host of holistic economic development issues that we think affect all of our rural communities. These strategies include everything from education and workforce development to health, physical and digital infrastructure, entrepreneurship and small business, homegrown manufacturing, agriculture and natural resources, as well as some overarching goals of working together better as regions and targeting technical assistance and capacity building for those that need it most. We remain committed to all 10 of these issues, and you will see us continuing to talk about policies and advocacy opportunities across the platform. But when it comes to having a distinct message for a day like Rural Day or having a strategy platform for a session, we need to focus that a little bit more. As Patrick said earlier, all of the conversations that we're having at Rural Day rose out of what we heard on the road in each of our 80 counties. We're going to be releasing this fall a full compendium of our lessons learned from the rural road trip that goes into much more detail than this. But for 2018 and for Rural Day, these are going to be the three top issues: broadband, health, small business. I'm going to go over the first two and then let Patrick talk about small business. To give you a sense, though, of what we're aiming for in the short session, the key word for the short session this year is short. We don't expect this session to last very long. They came into town last week to start the session, and legislators are hoping to be out of town by the end of next month. Their main job is to amend last year's budget, and they're limited on what they can do on the legislative front outside of that. So this year isn't the year for big, broad, new proposals. That means that this year what we're going to be aiming to do through Rural Day and our visits is to frame the priorities that matter most. That way legislators know when they come back to town next year for the bigger, long session that these are the topics they need to be ready to address. By communicating a consensus message this year with advocates from across the state, our leaders will know what needs to be on their minds over the fall and heading into next year. The other reason you're not going to see super specific policy proposals right now is because the Rural Center remains committed to collaborating with you. We've just finished traveling the state, hearing what your challenges are. We don't want to go back behind a curtain, create what we think are the best solutions, and then ask you to blindly support them. We want to work with you between now and next January to vet some specific policy proposals, make sure they'll work for your community, and then be ready to speak up together for them next year. So, throughout this presentation and at Rural Day, you're going to hear broad outlines of policies that are gaining some consensus and are working in other states and other areas. But it's not quite time for us to be able to march into a legislator's office and say, this is the exact policy solution. So, the first of the three issues is broadband. The Rural Center believes that broadband infrastructure is the economic development imperative of our time. There are many important issues out there, but few are as pervasive and multifaceted as the need for affordable, high-speed internet. And it's not just about Netflix. It's about educating our kids, keeping our families well, starting new businesses, connecting to the world, keeping our public safe. In short, if a community does not have broadband, it will not be competitive. In the same way, it would be impossible to compete in our economy without roads, water, or electricity. Now, when we start talking about policies around broadband, we think it's helpful to think about the three A's, or these three different buckets: availability, affordability, and adoption. To a large degree, North Carolina is actually in a good position when it comes to access or availability. We made big investments in the 1990s and 2000s in what we call the middle mile. That's something you'll probably hear a lot at Rural Day, and that is the major arteries of broadband fiber that cross our state and connect our major institutions, our schools, hospitals, libraries, universities, colleges, government centers. Due to that investment, you'll see here, the FCC estimates that 93% of North Carolinians have access to broadband. But does that seem a little off to you? That's because it is. The FCC uses a definition for access that claims if one house in a census tract has access to high-speed internet, every single house in that census tract is counted as having access. That means that because of our middle mile, there are many areas of the state that are close to a strong connection, but in actuality are nowhere near having competitive access. This is a little bit more of what our state looks like when it comes to access to high-speed internet. Now, some broadband experts will respond to concerns about access by pointing out that the true problem isn't access, but adoption. And they do have a point. You'll see here that county-level adoption rates average between 60 and 70%. We need to raise those. A key component of any broadband policy needs to be raising these rates through digital literacy programs and educating our people about the wide spectrum of benefits that the internet brings. Where adoption advocates miss the point, though, is why people don't adopt. For almost half of the people surveyed in North Carolina who are not adopting the internet, affordability is the main deterrent. So internet doesn't just have to be available. It also has to be affordable in order for people to subscribe. One specific issue you're going to be hearing about at Rural Day is the homework gap, or those students who are required to use their computers to complete school assignments but don't have access to the internet needed to complete them. Closing the homework gap is vital for the education of our children and the development of tomorrow's workforce. But it's also a great opportunity to start piloting programs around affordability, availability, and adoption that then could be expanded to an entire population. At Rural Day, then, you're going to hear about these several potential policy levers that could be pulled to address these challenges. First, we believe a state deployment grant program is an emerging policy that other states are using with great results. A grant program would help incentivize competition among providers in areas of the state where a viable business model for last-mile access is difficult. Rural areas of the state would be targeted, and then the state would accept bids from a variety of providers using various technologies to reach that last mile in those areas. The winning bids would receive a match from the state to deploy the infrastructure needed to reach the last mile. This is quickly becoming the gold standard in state policy for sparking competition for the most remote rural areas. Alongside a grant program, a Dig Once policy that would cut costs and increase efficiencies in infrastructure deployment. Also, adoption initiatives that include digital literacy training are an essential piece of the puzzle and could be explored with programs to close the homework gap. Finally, along with digital infrastructure, we need to develop telehealth services in our state. The Department of Health and Human Services recently released a report outlining ways to modernize regulations to open the door for increased telehealth access, and we think the state should implement those recommendations. When it comes to broadband, what's the bottom line for our leaders? The Rural Center believes this comes down to competition. Our state is amazingly diverse, and there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. At the same time, we're not asking entrepreneurs to open up an ice cream stand at the beach in the summer. The state must play a role in sparking competition in an industry where startup costs are expensive and in areas where a profitable business model is tough. So, at the end of the day, what we're working for is sparking competition needed to equip our rural areas with high-speed, affordable internet. The second policy area is rural health. Many people are surprised to learn that the Rural Center, an economic development organization, is talking about health. But we recognize that we're never going to see the thriving rural communities we need if people are not healthy and if health systems are not flourishing. So we have identified 4 major areas based on our conversations with you across the state that we need to work on to improve our health outcomes as a foundation for strong rural economies. First, just as in broadband, we need to expand access to rural health care. It's difficult to keep our people well if they don't have access to healthcare providers. Yet 70 of our 80 rural counties that we serve are federally designated medical deserts due to the lack of primary care access. On top of that, the health sector in itself is a cornerstone for a robust rural economy. The health sector in rural North Carolina employs almost 180,000 people, and these are high-paying jobs that bring in $2.3 billion in taxable wages each year. What's more, this is a growing industry and has been growing even in the depths of the Great Recession. Since 2000, rural North Carolina has seen a 36% increase in taxable wages in the health sector. Why is that important? Overall taxable wage increase in private sector industry has been just 7% in that same time period. So this is a hugely growing sector in our economy. So how do we expand that access? The North Carolina General Assembly last year appointed a special joint committee to look into options for increasing access to health care in rural North Carolina. Last month, it released its results, which include increased funding for medical education, designating more hospitals in rural areas as teaching hospitals to attract new doctors, increasing funding for our area health education centers, or AHECs, and for loan repayment programs for rural health providers. They also suggest some technical changes to our state health plan, Medicaid, and regulations to help increase health services and expand telemedicine. We think that these are good ideas, and the next step is making sure that they get introduced in the General Assembly and heard before the entire body and not just this one committee. The next piece of the puzzle is the coverage gap. The gap is a consequence of the American Affordable Care Act, which has left almost 400,000 people in North Carolina in the coverage gap. This means they don't qualify for Medicaid, but they're also ironically not making enough money to afford subsidies for health insurance on the new marketplaces. Most of these folks are hardworking North Carolinians working 1, 2, 3 jobs to make ends meet, but barely. They're farmers, fishermen, small business owners, and church pastors, and creating a state solution that gives them access to affordable insurance will help them, and it'll also help our economy. It's projected that closing the insurance gap would create, over a 4-year period, over 43,000 jobs in our state, add $21.5 billion in business activity, and generate $860 million in state revenue. And it would save $3.5 billion in uncompensated care. And this is important because when people don't have insurance, they go to the emergency room, with much more serious conditions that they can't pay for. And who ends up paying for that care? Those who do have insurance. The Rural Center is open to a variety of policy solutions to close the gap, but the imperative is clear that we must find a solution that gives these hardworking citizens access to insurance and helps make our rural economies more competitive. The third issue is one that we're probably all too familiar with, the opioid crisis. According to new data just released last week from Duke University and NC Department of Health and Human Services, there has been an 800% increase in opioid drug deaths from 1999 to 2016. That's 12,590 deaths in total, with 1,300 in 2016 alone. 78% of those deaths are from heroin or fentanyl, but prescription drugs are also a huge problem. In 1/3 of the counties in North Carolina, there are more prescriptions than there are people. The Rural Center applauds the General Assembly for unanimously passing the STOP Act in 2017, which should curb access to these prescriptions, but much more needs to be done both to treat those with addictions and to address the root causes of those addictions. The strain on our families, health systems, and workforce is too profound to wait another second to find real solutions. Finally, as I mentioned before, telehealth is a huge part of the future of rural health care. Sadly, those areas that most need telehealth services are also those areas that don't have access to the broadband that would allow them to utilize them. So on top of expanding that infrastructure with broadband, we also need to implement those DHHS recommendations I mentioned earlier. This page gives some more details about that plan from the department, talking about the scope, standards in informed consent, reimbursement standards, etc. We believe that this recommendation needs to be adopted. So again, for the bottom line for health, for the Rural Center, we know that we cannot have strong rural economies without healthy people and robust health systems. The solutions are complex and interrelated, and one single policy is never going to solve all the problems. But we can make great strides by implementing what's already been suggested by state experts and policymakers in each of these 4 issue areas. With that, I am sure everyone is ready for someone else's voice to be heard. So I will turn things over to Patrick to talk about our final area of small business development.
So our third and final issue that we'll focus our attention on a week from today.
Yeah.
A week from today is around small business development and the policies that are needed to encourage a more robust small business development system in our state. You're going to hear a very compelling message from the state's lead recruiter, Chris Chung, and I don't think there's probably any person that is in a better position to deliver this message than Chris, as a very experienced career recruiter that's done a great job for North Carolina. But one of the messages that he's going to deliver is that something we believe strongly: economic development means more than just recruitment. We also, in addition to recruitment, and we need to be good at it, we need to be better at it than our neighbors, we also need to focus on small business, on supporting the small businesses that are already here, growing our existing companies, and doing everything we can to increase the rate of small business creation. The Rural Center recommends that the General Assembly authorize a joint study committee that would work in the period of time between the end of the short session and the beginning of the long session in 2019 to really do the research and come forth with a set of recommendations that they then act upon in the 2019 General Assembly that would build a more robust small business policy for our state in economic development. So we have outlined 4 strategies that we're really going to focus on in this segment around what is needed to increase support for our small businesses. Number 1, creating a balanced approach to funding economic development, remembering it's not all about recruitment, it's also about existing businesses and new startups. Strengthening the existing ecosystem of small business support. We actually have a robust system in North Carolina that is not well coordinated at a statewide level. Third, increasing local capital access through some sustainable solutions that we believe will lead to better results, and investing in long-term disaster recovery for small businesses. In terms of a balanced approach, we need to see added capacity for organizations that are focused on small business support. We have a lot of organizations across the state that play a role in providing technical assistance to existing businesses and new startups. They needed additional capacity in order to do a better job and to reach more small businesses. We need to expand digital literacy education in our school systems, which has a direct effect on the skill set of our entrepreneurs as they're looking to grow their businesses. We need to enhance entrepreneurship education programs throughout the K-12 and community college levels to make them more robust and to reach more students at an earlier age. We need to increase public awareness of the success of local entrepreneurs right close to home. Every county has these success stories to tell. We need to do a much better job of really thinking about where our existing jobs come from and how important existing businesses and entrepreneurs are when it comes to the current mix of our existing jobs. We also need to reduce barriers to entry and growth and make it easier for our entrepreneurs to succeed and our small businesses to grow. Third, in the area of capital access, you're going to get some good information that is extremely new from Napoleon Wallace, our Deputy Secretary for Rural Development at the North Carolina Department of Commerce, as he will talk about opportunity zones, that program, and the efforts that must occur. We must be very intentional at a rural level to do what it's going to be necessary in order to make sure that those investments actually make their way to our rural communities. They won't happen on their own. And so we're going to have to be very intentional about creating a system that will encourage those opportunity zones to work when it comes to rural investment opportunities. We also believe there is some legislation pending in the General Assembly that we expect will be coming back forward about ways to improve capital access, and we believe that any state funding should revolve around three basic principles: allocating funds via a competitive and open process to qualified, experienced in-state lenders and investors, people that already know the North Carolina marketplace and are experienced in reaching that marketplace. Secondly, we believe there should be a requirement that state funding be put into an evergreen model so that the funds, as they are returned, can be continually reinvested into our rural businesses. It's not a fund and done deal that has to be replenished year after year, but is an evergreen fund that actually can grow year after year and have ongoing meaningful impact. Third, structure a program to ensure meaningful and reportable rural impact. We're very concerned when we see legislation that talks about a rural county being a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 county and uses that as the definition for rural. That is not a definition for rural. And we want to make sure that the impact that we see from legislation in our rural communities is measurable, meaningful, and reportable. Third issue priority is strengthening the existing ecosystem. As I mentioned, we have a robust ecosystem of agencies and organizations. Some are state supported, some are private nonprofits, such as the Rural Center, that are involved in providing some aspect of technical support to our small business world in North Carolina. These organizations need to be better resourced and they need to be better connected. Some of the most important ones to put on this list is the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina and their cadre of existing business support agencies or economic developers, and also NC Blink, which is an 800 number that really connects businesses to the resources that exist. Our network of small business centers found at all 58 of our community colleges across the state are incredibly important, as is the SBTDC, Small Business Technology Development Center, located on many of the campuses of our UNC system colleges. And finally, we need to really be thinking toward the future as we continue to work with those communities in southeastern North Carolina that were affected by Hurricane Matthew and still struggle to really turn that curve from relief to long-term economic recovery. We need to be thinking about the next long-term disaster recovery effort. We need to make sure that when those instances like Matthew occur, that we can provide immediate access to bridge loans, that we can provide short-term employment opportunities that are really geared toward meeting immediate post-disaster needs. We need to see longer-term loans that are available to cover funding gaps. We need to see funding for disaster resiliency and preparedness so that we are better able to insulate our rural communities from the effects of these impending disasters. And we also need to see improved access for local and minority-owned contractors in their efforts to bid on recovery projects. We can do a lot better job in that arena. The bottom line, small businesses are the heart of our rural economy. 75% of all business establishments in the 80 rural North Carolina counties employ 10 or fewer people. So we are a rural economy of not only small businesses, but very small businesses. And it's incredibly important that we do a better job of supporting them. There is currently no really organized state-level strategy to support our state's existing businesses, and we need to really work on strengthening that leg of the stool. We must also develop statewide networks and encourage legislative champions that will step forward to coordinate and leverage support for our small businesses.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Well, with that, we have gotten through the content that we wanted to cover today. If you have any more questions, we have just a couple of minutes that we'll stick around to take some more questions. If you have any questions between now and Rural Day, we encourage you to give me a call, shoot me an email, mention me at Twitter @JohnCoggin. And speaking of social media, as you prep for Rural Day and during the day itself, we hope you'll use these hashtags, Rural Day 2018 and Rural Counts, as you interact with our presence on both Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So one person asks, is it possible to see our representatives on Monday if we can't see them on Wednesday? It's worth giving a call to the legislative offices, but because Monday is Memorial Day, it's a holiday and the legislature is not in session, so it's very likely that they will not be in town. However, if you're going to be at home and they're going to be at home, there might be an opportunity for you to meet with them on the home turf. But I would refer you to the legislative offices themselves just to confirm. I have just found this out, Patrick, you might know, that the FCC chairman is in North Carolina today to announce a new school broadband connection. Any chance he's going to be at Rural Day as well? We have 40 fantastic speakers. The FCC chairman is not going to be one of them at Rural Day, but thank you for letting us know that he was in town today, and we'll definitely try to get the word out about that on our networks. We have one really good question about a roster of attendees. Because of privacy concerns, we have not released a full list just because we don't want to give sort of names and contact information for everybody on the list. But there will be many opportunities for you to talk with and connect with people. There's during the registration hour with breakfast, an hour over lunch, and then the couple of hours at the reception to connect with people from your area. All right, well, I think I've gotten through most of the questions. If you, again, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email if you have more questions for me, but we really thank you for your attention and participation today, and we cannot wait to see you on May 29th. It's going to be a fun day, and we are so glad you're going to be with us. Thank you very much.